for it. If we do not manage it well, we will have haphazard urbanization. But if we actually attend to the challenges that urbanization poses, including skill development, including law and order, including providing safety to our women in our cities, we will actually be able to contribute to economic growth in the country. Finally, I would like to say that one of the initiatives that we have decided to launch from next month, that ICRIER and India Habitat Center are coming together to start a program called Conversations on Urbanization. And every second month, we will have either an eminent person, a resource person, and an expert on urban issues who can talk the common language to interact with Habitat membership, or we will bring some global expert to come and speak with people to raise awareness on the importance of wastewater treatment, on the importance of solid waste management, on the importance of providing high quality public transport in our cities, on the importance of demanding accountability from our government leaders at every level of government, whether it is city level, state level, or the central level. So we have in our own way started a process of building awareness, knowledge building, and at the same time sharing the knowledge that we accumulate in the process. So with these words, I will now invite my friend and co-editor, Professor Ravi Kanbur, to provide a global perspective on what we try to do in this book. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Isha and friends. Given the time constraints that we face, and given that Isha has already told us what's in the book, and also given that in the workshop that we had, Isha encouraged us to think about future research and future work and future implications of this, I thought I would take this opportunity to raise just one point for us to think about for the future. You know, two of the great stylized predictions of development economics are firstly that with growth and development there will be urbanization. And the second is that with growth and development there will be formalization. In other words, the formal sector of the economy will rise with growth and development, and the urban share of the population will rise with growth and development. And the way that we used to establish this, is that we have a chart in which we have per capita income against, let's say, the share of the urban population, and that always showed a rising relationship, and the share of the informal population engaged in informal activities against per capita income, and that always showed a declining relationship. Well, in the last 20 years, something very interesting is happening. In the last 20 years, the first of those predictions is coming true, and it's coming true in spades, that we know, very rapid urbanization. But the second prediction is not coming true. The degree of informality across the world is not, at the very least, is not falling as rapidly as we expected. It's probably stagnant, and in some countries it's actually increasing. And India is a case in point, where the rate of informality is not declining as fast as expected. Perhaps it's stable, maybe even a little bit increasing, depending on exactly what measures you use. So that's the question I put to you as a research question. Why is it that the second great prediction of development economics is not coming true, has not come true in the last 20 years? Well, there are many sorts of explanations. One of them is to do with regulation and deregulation and how that's changing. Another type of explanation is to do with technology, how technology is changing and maybe making small-scale activity more profitable than it was previously, and that's why activity is moving this way. But a third type of explanation, or third hypothesis, could it be that the nature of urbanization itself is linked to the increasing, or at least the non-falling rate of informality? In fact, the evidence in India suggests that informal activities are tending to move into urban areas, and formal activities are trying to move out of urban areas. So I put this to you as an interesting research question, that as we think about all the sorts of things we discussed in the book and we discussed in the workshop in terms of infrastructure and more efficient forms of governance and PPP, etc., that when we push those things, let's be cautious and let's be clear about what the impact is going to be on the informal sector of the economy as well. So, a great stylized fact is now being questioned. It leads to a great research question, and it also, in my view, leads to some policy questions and policy caution on what we do in terms of infrastructure and other consequences. Thank you very much, ladies.
Honorable Minister, distinguished dignitaries in the dais, esteemed participants. The developed world saw two revolutions, agricultural, industrial revolution. The developing world is witnessing the urban revolution. This revolution is far more important to the humanity in terms of impact on the lives of the poor and the downtrodden. India is at the forefront of this revolution. India will add 500 billion in cities and towns in 4 decades. Urbanization is a challenge. It is also an opportunity because cities are the engines of growth. They are the catalysts of human development and inclusion. In this book, we have addressed some problems of urbanization, and these include planning, financing, governance and inclusion. As far as India is concerned, urban development is a state subject, so there is a significant role for the state governments. I have listed out 6 roles following our book. First, the states have to provide a new legal framework for good urban governance by modernizing the municipal laws and other related laws. Many of these are archaic and they follow from the 1935 Government of India Act. Number 2, create a framework for effective spatial planning, duly restructuring the master planning, which will integrate transportation and land use planning, spatial and economic planning, physical and financial planning. And we need to amend our town planning laws, regulations, 80% of which in the morning Mr. Patel was telling that they are obsolete. Number 3, empowering the municipalities with functions, finances and functionaries. We started in 92 with the 74th Amendment Act. The task is incomplete. We need to carry forward this task on the principle of subsidiarity. A large country like India cannot expect to address the civics delivery needs of the service needs of the poor people without going to the 3rd tier. So the 3rd tier needs to be strengthened. 4th, making urban planning inclusive. Master plans have been criticized as exclusionary. We need an inclusive model of planning. Our planning model is not sync with income distribution structure of our cities. Our cities have got 70% of the poor of people living in the cities, but we plan for the middle class. The 5th point is, I think there is a need to emphasize regional planning. When we talk of cities and city regions, the growth happens. The city regions are the engines of growth. Across the world, few hundred city regions are driving the global economy. We need to have a regional approach in which transportation plays a key role, and transportation should be a leader in leading development rather than a residual in the current model. 6th, land is a major resource. Urban land is very valuable because of its location. In cities, we call the dominant paradigm is location, location and location. The locational rent to the properties of the land, it is yet to be exploited. if we exploit the locational rent because of agglomeration externalities and escrow it to fund infrastructure, again land values will increase, but infrastructure will be created. So land as a resource is very important. Lastly, our cities suffer from institutional and human resource capacity constraints. I think the single most important factor that hinders planned urbanization in India is the lack of professionalism at all levels. I would request the Honorable Minister, Mrs. Aulbela's committee, propose the establishment of Indian Institutes of Urban Management and quite a number of capacity building measures. I think we should start Bhavan-2 with a strong emphasis on capacity building. Thank you.
Invite Kamalnath ji to release the book in the presence of the authors and editors. So will the authors please come up and join us? Monte, I can spot you. Please come. Wherever is Vimal? We need to move this side.
Mrs. Gulshan Kaur, Dr. Ishwar Ahluwalia, Professor Ravi Kanbur, Dr. P.K. Mohanty, Mr. Vivek Mehra, and distinguished participants in this program this evening. I'm delighted to be here at the release of this book, which is absolutely the right time. Nothing could be more right than this moment when we need to release this book, and also along with this, discussions on urbanization in India. Development is always and everywhere accompanied by urbanization. During the Industrial Revolution, for example, the share of urban population rose from 17% in 1801 to 54% in 1891. Today, the share of urban population in the richest countries is above 80%. By 2008, half of the world's population will be urban, has been urban. The developing countries are the least urbanized. And that is a crucial thing to note, that the least urbanized countries are the developing countries. And in future, most of the world's urbanization will come from and will happen in developing countries. If development is always accompanied by urbanization, then successful urbanization is accompanied by successful urbanization. Urbanization which takes advantage of agglomeration benefits while being inclusive enough to ensure a broad sharing of the gains from development. Urbanization in India will only increase. The only question when urbanization increases in India is whether we'll be able to manage it well. And how do we make it an engine of growth and poverty reduction? India has been a very late urbanizer. However, it is now realized that urban centers are the engines of growth and need to be nurtured and adequately provided for. We see all around infrastructure deficit, but the deficit which stares us on our face every day is the urban infrastructure deficit. Other infrastructure deficits like airports is when you travel, roads and highways is when you are going somewhere. But urban infrastructure stares you on your face every day. And in India, in urban areas particularly, growth preceded infrastructure. Because growth preceded infrastructure, we have this huge infrastructure deficit. And this huge infrastructure deficit means that what we'll build in the next 5 or 10 years will not be building for the future, but will be catching up with the past. So we'll still be trying to make up the deficit which we have. Coupled with a young demographic profile, we have a very young demographic profile, which is conducive to high mobility. The youngsters pack their bags and move. So mobility becomes much higher. Urbanization takes place much faster from the smaller, from rural areas to the smaller municipalities, from the smaller municipalities to the bigger municipalities, and from the bigger municipalities to municipal corporations, then to our metropolitan city, to the metropolis. So this tendency we are seeing, and as was said earlier, that we are going to see 70-75% of our GDP is going to be generated from urban areas in the next decade. Well, our vision has been to create, to facilitate creation of economically vibrant, inclusive, efficient, and sustainable urban habitats. And I'd like to briefly focus upon some of the important steps that we need to take. First is emphasize long-term strategic planning for emergence and growth of new cities, not only on the specific context of municipal cities, but encompassing the regional planning perspective, that is suburbanization. So when we talk of urbanization in India, we must necessarily be talking of suburbanization. In India, we've had suburbanization, but that's been suburbanization by default, not suburbanization by design. And how do we have planned suburbanization? We had the huge Gurgaon being built up. I see Mr. KP Singh here. We saw Noida come up. Much of it was in Noida, etc., when we were building in all the new areas which have come up. Some of it was planned, some of it has been suburbanization by default. And when you look across suburbanization, the good suburbanization has been that suburbanization by design. And when you say bad suburbanization, it is suburbanization by default. The second is we need to boost investment in urban infrastructure, both intervention by the government as well as a greater role by the private sector. Now in India we had no role of the private sector, very, very, very minimal role. We didn't even count it. So private sector role has just not been there because we've not encouraged it. We've not been hungry for it. We've not been hungry for it, but we've not been looking at it. That has been the big problem. The third is strengthening urban governance. Mr. Mohanty touched on this, with changes in administrative rules, delineating areas of accountability for elected representatives. There is a need to create local governments that are represented, financially strong and inclusive. And when we talk about local elected representatives, these are all a part of our large democracy. And we must remember that we, in the democracy which we have, we are not only the largest democracy, we are the rowdiest democracy. And the rowdiest democracy is not only what you see happening here, but also what's happening in the small municipalities, where you have elected representatives, you have municipal councillors. There are very combative elections for municipalities. I know it as a politician, that all the time you're on election mode, one or the other municipality is always having an election. So, with such combative municipal elections, and this is an area which requires, we need to go into this. How do you create convergence between governance, between accountabilities, and elected representatives? When we try and look at a municipality, and you try and see what does it need, you find the elected representative is concerned with his area, with his ward. He has promised the people all kinds of things. There's no integration. So, the planning process may be entirely different. How do you converge on this between the elected representatives and the need for skills and strengths in this area? The fourth point is strengthening soft infrastructure, that is capacity building, both human and organizational. And this Mr. Mohanty emphasized very well. Addressing the needs of the urban poor by providing basic services like water, supply, sanitation, education, healthcare. And the last is, how do we shift the focus of infrastructure projects from asset creation to service delivery? There's so much of focus on asset creation, but the emphasis we need on service delivery gets lost.